Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Lonnie Friedman. I am the health literacy specialist with Vaughan Public Libraries. I'm located, despite my background, in the Cordelucci Vaughan Hospital and the Mackenzie Health Vaughan Library. So tonight we have a special guest, Susan L. Lambert. Before we begin, though, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. Vaughan Public Libraries respectfully acknowledges that our libraries were built upon the territory and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation per the Toronto Purchase Agreement, or Treaty 13. We also recognize we are situated in the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee, who occupied this land before the arrival of European settlers. The city of Vaughan is currently home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge their contribution to the life and prosperity of this land. As representatives of the people of the city of Vaughan, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. For our presenter today, we have a very special guest from Boomerang Health SickKids. Dr. Susan L. Lambert is a clinical psychologist at Boomerang Health SickKids clinic located in Vaughan. She has extensive training in the psychological assessment and treatment of children, adolescents, and families, and a wealth of experience providing support to youth and their families struggling with a range of mental health difficulties. Her experiences include assessing and treating anxiety, depression, emotion regulation issues, attentional difficulties, anger management problems, school issues, parent-child relation conflict, and adjustment difficulties. Dr. Lambert uses evidence-based techniques to guide her approach to assessing and treatment, while also taking into consideration and being sensitive to the unique needs of her clients. She is passionate about delivering quality care with the goal of improving the lives of children, adolescents, and their families. Dr. Lambert earned her doctorate and master's degrees in clinical-developmental psychology from York University, and she is registered with the College of Psychologists of Ontario. With that, Susan, the floor is yours.
Okay, so tonight we are talking about challenges with attention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And you'll notice that I gave it that title versus saying we're talking about ADHD tonight, because you don't need to have a diagnosis to better understand some of these issues and to understand some strategies that could be helpful. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is based on work by Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson, the no drama discipline approach, and collaborative and proactive problem solving, which is Dr. Ross Greene's model. And less so about emotion-focused family therapy, but those are the psychologists that are involved with that. Okay, so let's start by talking a little bit about what is ADHD. And then, so just in terms of an overview, we're going to talk about exploring what we call lagging skills. We're going to be talking about a little bit about discipline and kind of understanding how we help kids and teach them lessons and strategies and thinking about brain development. And then we're going to be talking about connection and redirection strategies, and specifically focused on something called collaborative and solution-focused problem solving. So I'm not sure, everyone probably is coming with different degrees of knowledge and understanding of what ADHD is and issues with attention, but specifically I thought I would spend a few minutes talking exactly about ADHD and what it is versus what it isn't. So I'm going to put a couple common myths versus facts up on the screen, and you can just think about them for a minute. Probably have too many people for too much of an interactive discussion, although at any point, if anyone has questions, feel free to let me know. But so first comment, ADHD means that you have trouble paying attention at school, but not at home. So it's just when you're in school, but you don't have any of those kinds of issues when you're at home. So that would be false. That's a really common myth that, they have issues at school and that means they have ADHD. Well, we really want to understand what the issues are across different settings. Learning issues, anxiety, or sleep issues can lead to symptoms that mimic symptoms of ADHD. So that's actually very true. So there's a lot of overlap between ADHD and these other things. And we really, when we're giving diagnoses, and today is not about diagnoses, but if we were to give a diagnosis of ADHD, we'd want to really understand the impact of learning, anxiety, sleep, among some other things, and what the overlap is, and if it's really ADHD or if it's something else. Kids with ADHD can't focus on video games or can't watch TV for a long time. So that might be something you're more familiar with, but that's actually very false. Just because you can play video games all day long does not mean that you don't have ADHD. Kids can get very hyper-focused on certain tasks. And if you have ADHD, you have trouble with attention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, or all three together. And that's very true. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about what ADHD is, and those are really the three hallmarks of ADHD. So what is ADHD? So there are three main types. So ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then we use the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. It's been through 5 editions over the past many years. And the most recent adaptation, they talk about ADHD as one of 3 types. Either it's the predominantly inattentive type, the hyperactive impulsive type, or the combined type, which means you have the inattentive symptoms and the hyperactive symptoms. ADHD-C is the most common type. So people might talk about ADD, and that's an old term from one of the earlier versions of the DSM. ADD is attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity part, but now that we call that ADHD-I, ADHD inattentive type. So rather than distinguishing between ADHD and ADD. So they're now all considered ADHD. So when I'm talking about inattention, what do I mean? Easily distracted, trouble staying focused on tasks, unless maybe it's highly stimulating, so something they're really, really interested in, for example, video games, or like they're really into a Lego puzzle that they're working on. That would be something that maybe they could focus on for a long period of time. Difficulty organizing tasks or activities, often losing things or misplacing things. They often seem to be daydreaming. They might be really forgetful. Kids with the inattentive presentation are probably not the kids that are disruptive in class. So they're less likely to be noticed by the teacher, right? They're not acting out, they're not being impulsive, they're not being oppositional. And so you might not notice that a child with the inattentive type isn't actually paying attention. Kind of the classic case of ADHD inattentive type is the inattentive girl who's kind of daydreaming all day in class. This can be true of boys too, but there is research that kind of girls have the more of the inattentive presentation. Okay. The hyperactive type is more about that kind of overactivity. So kids with the hyperactive type always need to be moving. They're very fidgety. They're unable to stay seated when expected. They can't stay seated through class, through dinner time. Parents will describe that they're always on the go. They're driven by a motor. They have a hard time playing quietly. And then the impulsive symptoms, so hyperactivity and impulsivity go together, but they're 2 different symptoms. So the impulsive symptoms is they tend to do things first and think after, right? So they act before they think. They're just responding in the moment. And then after they're like, oh, I guess I didn't mean to do that, or I shouldn't have done that. They could be easily frustrated. They have trouble waiting their turn, they're interrupting, they might be overly chatty, they're not like kind of picking up on some of the social cues, they're just kind of responding in the moment, right? And so those are the impulsive symptoms. So aside from kind of understanding the main presentation, we also want to think about a few other things if we're giving a diagnosis. It needs to be present before age 12. So we want to, if you have a 13 or a 14-year-old who have some of these symptoms, it might be something that is truly ADHD, but we want to understand, is this new? Is this something that just started, or have they always struggled with these kinds of things, and maybe it's just getting worse or it's getting in the way more? But at least some of the symptoms have been present before age 12. And when I talked initially, I said it must be present in 2 or more settings. So if you have all these symptoms at school, like say, but not at home, or vice versa, at home but not at school, it wouldn't meet criteria for ADHD. You need to, your brain, the way it's developing, and your impairments are so impactful that they're impacting you across settings. And if they're only impacting you in one setting, then we want to understand a little bit more about what other factors could be going in and what else could be playing a part. We also talk about level of interference. So we all have, and I'm sure, you know, some of you here tonight would say, oh, like, oh yeah, I'm ADHD, or I have ADHD symptoms. So we all have different, you know, behaviors sometimes, or symptoms in different situations. But the question is always, do we have enough? And how much is it impairing? So level of impairment is really, at the end of the day, the number one thing that we're always looking at. So if we've figured out how to cope with these things, and if it's not getting in the way, then it's not considered a disorder. It's not impairing. Okay. So that's what ADHD is, just to kind of give you that framework. Sorry. What else can it be? So sometimes we want to think about, okay, like these are some of the issues, but it could be this, but it could also be something else. So learning issues are one of the most common things that we're always thinking about when we're wondering about ADHD. We want to understand a child's learning profile, because issues with attention can be a result of struggles in school, right? They're really having a hard time understanding academic material, and that's why they're struggling with focus, right? And so understanding the learning profile is really important. We also want to understand anxiety. So when we're really anxious about something, we struggle to focus. Sorry, just going to pause for 1 second. Please give me 1 second. So sorry about that. Okay. Sleep problems. Sleep problems, actually, there's a lot of research that has come out in the past few years highlighting the impact of sleep on kids and how that can mimic issues of ADHD. So kids that are tired end up looking like they can't focus and can't pay attention. They could be extra fidgety and hyper. And so it's really important to kind of look at that piece and understand, you know, is my child struggling with sleep a lot? Do I think they're more tired consistently than you might expect? And can we do things to kind of get sleep under control before we look at ADHD? So once I know that they're getting a good amount of sleep and they're having, you know, really solid, restful sleeps, and they're still struggling with some of these symptoms, then maybe it's more of an attention issue. We also want to understand family stressors, trauma, and how that can be impacting, you know, a child's presentation, because of course that could have a big impact. With older kids, we look at substance use, a lot of the irritability or impulsivity can be related to other things related to substances more than ADHD. So my goal today is not to kind of help you diagnose your children by any means. And if you are seriously worried about something and it seems like some of these things might be relevant, then definitely speak to your family doctor and work with professionals to figure that out. But the goal today isn't to diagnose, but the goal today is to really think about, like, maybe my child already is diagnosed and you already know that these are problems, or just thinking about, like, what are some of the things that might be getting in my child's way and they're not performing optimally, and probably it's some of these things, some of like issues related to being hyper, being inattentive, being impulsive. And so what I want to talk to you about today is how we get good at really understanding these kinds of problems and what do we do about it. So we talk about, Ross Greene talks about what we call lagging skills. And so the idea is we're all here today because we have some concern with our child's behavior that's getting in the way to some degree. And it's become impairing, right? It's become a problem at home or at school, or at least in one setting. And we really want to understand specifically be able to label what it is that we're struggling with. We know things aren't going well. We know there's like stress at home or at school, but what exactly am I identifying as the main problem here in order to figure out how to support it? And that's important for us as parents, but it's also important for kids themselves, like being able to label my problem and identify what we call lagging skills, what my lagging skills are, is really important, because that helps us understand better what to do. So Ross Greene talks about kids who fail to behave as we expect are often seen as being willfully disobedient, right? So, we'll say things like, they just want my attention, they're being manipulative, they want things their own way, they know how to push my buttons, they're being lazy, he has a bad attitude. And so when we think of these things, we're not really, we're kind of taking the stand, they don't want to do these things. They're just, being disobedient, and they just don't want to do these things. But the truth is, that's not quite what it is. So kids have different strengths and weaknesses and their abilities, just like adults, right? We all have areas that are easier for us and things that are harder for us. And that's kind of the way our brains work. And we all have a certain skill set. Plus, our capacities fluctuate, right? So given the day, me tonight with all my technology issues, like my capacity to handle certain stressors might be lower than my capacity first thing in the morning after like a really restful sleep, right? And so when we're thinking about kids and their skills, we want to think about why they're failing to behave as expected, and what skills are they missing in that particular moment. So kind of generally what their skills are, but also in that particular moment, what their capacities are, and where the disconnect is, and really being able to label like, oh, this is what is hard right now for my child. So there's capacity in the moment, kind of the situational factors. There's lagging skills, which we're going to talk about, but related to difficulties with attention and focus. And then there's also the fact that their brains aren't fully developed yet. So the difference between, with adults, we have some of these things, but we have a fully developed brain. But with kids, their brains are still growing, right? So the demands of the situation is exceeding their capacity and their skills. So it's not that they won't control their emotions and make good decisions, but they actually can't. And so Ross Greene's kind of focus is really helping caregivers understand, we all understand this maybe to some degree, but really taking to heart that it's not that they won't do something, but it's they actually can't in that moment for all the different reasons that I just said. So we need to assume that kids will sometimes be emotionally reactive or oppositional. We actually need to assume that, because they're not working from fully formed brains yet, and they're literally incapable of meeting our expectations all the time. And this is true for all kids. And that's on top of the possibility that for some kids, their brains are actually developing differently. So kids with ADHD, their prefrontal cortex is kind of front part of our brains that are responsible for planning and organizing, attending to information, controlling impulses. We call them our executive functions. And kids with ADHD, their executive functions are slower to develop. Research has shown that by adulthood, the brains look similar, but in childhood, there's a lot of kind of missing parts to that prefrontal cortex in the executive functioning skills. And so they're slower to develop. And so it's kind of a multitude of different factors that we need to be mindful of, I guess, when we're approaching a situation. So let's talk about what I mean by lagging skills. So these are what Ross Greene talks about as kind of the common lagging skills. So emotion regulation, difficulty thinking flexibly, being able to handle change. So a lot of kids have a hard time with transitions, being able to express their feelings and putting their feelings into words, considering consequences of actions, being assertive, having a good sense of time, tolerating disappointment, paying attention, handling uncertainty. So these are all examples of lagging skills that, we all have certain lagging skills, but I want you to think about your kids that, might be struggling, and which areas might they be lagging in. And so it's really important to think about kind of why our child is having a hard time with the problem, right? So our goal when we're interacting with our kids in moments when they're having a hard time, and we're usually trying to discipline them, and really by discipline, I mean teach. We're trying to teach them a better way to handle a situation, or trying to teach them how not to handle a situation next time, right? And so when we're in these negative or explosive situations, we want to stop and take a step back and think, okay, like, why is my child having such a hard time right now? So that doesn't change what happens, that doesn't fix the problem, but it's the first step in really understanding what is really going on here. It's not that my child doesn't want to do something, it's that there's actually a skill deficit in a certain area. And so once we understand that, then we can figure out, okay, well, what's my unsolved problem? What's the solved problem that I'm trying to solve? That's a result from this lagging skill. So my goal today is to really think about, like, what are expectations of our kids, and why are they having difficulty meeting that expectation? So what is their lagging skill that they might be struggling with? And so we're going to talk more about how we do that. But if everyone just wants to take a minute, if you haven't already, to kind of just look at this list and kind of think about, one or two things that stick out for you that, like, yes, my child really does struggle with that. And there might be a lot, but really kind of focus in on one or two that really get in the way the most, right? Like the thing that kind of, regardless of the situation or regardless of what's happening, like this keeps coming up, or it's really getting in the way the most. And this is what I really want to target as, like, kind of my first thing that I want to think about with my child. So, and the reason I talk about lagging skills, again, back to Ross Greene, is he really wants us to rethink how kids behave and what their emotions are. And we really want to think about this idea that all kids want to do well, and doing well is always more favorable than not doing well. They want to succeed, they want to feel happy and calm, they want to please others, and they want to make good choices. And when they're not doing well, it's not because they won't, but it's because they can't. So they have a lagging skill and an unmet emotional need. And the reason this is so important is because of our parental reactions, how we as caregivers respond to our kids in these intense moments. And how we respond to them in these moments is even more important than how we respond to them most of the time, because these are the most intense moments, right? This is when they need us the most. And this is when it's hardest for us to be there for them. And so we really want to rethink, how we're approaching them. And in order to do that, we're thinking about, like, they're doing this because they have a lagging skill. Their brain hasn't fully developed in this area yet. It's not that they just, want to be difficult, or, I'm having a bad day and just want to be hard on me, right? And so even just thinking about yourself, I think I mentioned this before, even as a caregiver, right? We're loving and patient most of the time, right? Or hopefully at least some of the time, but sometimes we lose it too. And sometimes we, can't be as patient as we want to be. And we've had a rough day, or we have too many demands on us, or we're tired. And so it's not because we're choosing to, it's not because we want to, it just happens. And so for all of us, especially for kids, our capacity fluctuates given our state of mind, which is influenced by so many factors. It's true for adults, but it's especially true. It's even more so true for kids whose brains are still developing, and even more so for kids whose brains aren't developing as quickly in certain areas, and particularly in terms of the executive functioning skills, which are related to the ADHD issues. Okay, so I'm actually just going to spend another minute talking a little bit about brain development. So Ross Greene, actually this is Dan Siegel's work, and he does the no drama discipline approach to parenting, which is an excellent book that I recommend. And he talks about that we have kind of, if you think of our brain like a house, there's two parts of our brain. There's our downstairs brain, which is this part here. And this is, we have from birth. So we're born with this instinctual brain that's really basic, and it controls kind of our fight and flight, our kind of survival skills. And it's triggered whenever we think we're in danger. So this is where anger comes from, fear. These are physiological responses when we think about fight or flight. So basically, it's like our body's alarm system, and it tells us when we need to defend ourselves against danger. And that's since birth, we all have that. And then there's our upstairs brain. And our upstairs brain is what I was saying before, the prefrontal cortex of our brain. And this is responsible for thinking, planning, being creative. And this is what helps us kind of as we grow and develop. It's really not fully formed until about age 25, but it helps us live balanced lives and meaningful lives and enjoy healthy relationships, and helps us with decision making, right? So think about when our child is dysregulated, when they're faced with something and they can't do it because of a lagging skill, which area of the brain do we want to appeal to, right? We want to appeal to this upstairs brain. We want to talk to them calmly in those moments, but most likely they're probably in downstairs brain state. So our number one goal, actually, when we're engaging with our kids in these moments, is to move from the downstairs brain state to the upstairs brain state. So rather than yelling and screaming and assuming that they're doing these things on purpose because they won't do what we want, we're thinking about this can't mentality and the lagging skills. And so there's two things that we want to be thinking about. So we want to connect and redirect. And so in order to have a successful kind of intervention in a moment when our child is not acting the way we want them to be, or we need to kind of reach a goal, we want to really be thinking about these two things. And, different situations call for different things, and I'm being very general tonight, but always kind of going back to that framework and having that overarching idea in your mind of, in order to successfully kind of change a behavior or work on a lagging skill, I need to stop and first connect with my child. And then once I'm connected, then I can redirect and I can focus on how to kind of help them through this situation and help them deal with this struggle that they're struggling with. Okay, so connection is about being emotionally responsive to your child. So it's that inner sense of being seen and understood, that feeling felt moment. So kids, nobody ever wants to feel alone, or that no one understands them. And so the first and most important element of working with our child in a moment of need is respecting where they're coming from and accepting their feelings, even if we disagree with their behavior. And so we want to show them, I hear what you're saying. This is really hard for you. You're having a really hard time. You really, really wanted to do this thing and you feel really sad that you got in trouble today or whatever it is, but just showing them, kind of getting down to their level, looking them in the eye and giving them that moment, right? Even if we're feeling frustrated about what happened or, we have a lot of other things going on, being able to stop and get down to their level and connect with them will end up saving us a lot of time in the long run, because once they feel connected, they're much more, they'll move from that downstairs brain state to that upstairs brain state. And once they're in upstairs brain state, it's much easier for them to problem solve and work through a situation and figure out strategies. Okay, so once we've done connection, we're going to focus today on redirection. And so redirection means, so connection is being there for your child emotionally when they're having a hard time, but it doesn't mean we should continue to let kids behave inappropriately, which is what redirection is all about. So kids do need boundaries and limits, it doesn't feel good for them to be out of control. And so we want to be firm. And so we say we're going to be permissive with feelings. Feelings are always okay. We want to validate as much as we can how a child feels. And we're still going to set limits on behavior. We're still going to be firm and say, that's not okay. I have to set a boundary here. And so I'm just going to read this quote from Dan Siegel. He said, kids need us to set boundaries and communicate our expectations. But the key here is that all discipline should begin by nurturing our children and attuning to their internal world, allowing them to know that they're seen, heard, loved by their parents, even when they're doing something wrong, right? And so back to this idea of the lagging skill, the more you can identify what the lagging skill is, the more it will help you connect with them, because you're not looking at them as, oh, my kid won't do what I ask. Oh, there was something that's getting in their way. And it gives you more empathy to then be able to connect with them, which then regulates them and moves them from downstairs brain to upstairs brain. And then you can actually figure out what to do about this behavior, right? So we really want to separate feeling from behavior. Again, like, it's not okay to hit your brother. It's not okay to, get out of your seat 50 times at school. Like, behaviors need to be dealt with. But in order to successfully kind of figure out how to work on behaviors, we need to connect. So in order to connect, we need to validate and kind of understand the emotions. Okay. So again, just in terms of redirection, we're setting limits on behavior, we're teaching skills, and we want to, there's this quote, kind of catch them being good. So we want to notice when they're doing things well and reinforce the things that they're doing well. It's so much more successful than consequencing when things don't go well. And so we want to kind of have a redo. Let's practice that again, but let's try it this way, right? Because once they're in that calm, receptive upstairs brain state, they're going to be much more open to, okay, yeah, like, I really want to do it this way. Because let's remember, again, kids do well if they can, right? And so most kids, 99.999% of kids are not kind of, don't have this psychopathy trait, right? So they want to please you. They want to do well. They want to be successful, right? And so a collaborative process that helps us think of kids more about appropriate ways of handling their emotions are a problem, is really helpful in the long term. And so kind of that's what our goal is to be collaborative as much as possible. Okay, so back to the lagging skills, we were thinking before about what lagging skills my child might have. And then I just want you to think about, like, how are we going to teach this? So, okay, once I know, okay, paying attention is a lagging skill my child has, and we're able to label that, and your child is able to label it, oh yeah, Mommy, it's really hard for me to pay attention a lot of the time. Like, I have lots of other strengths and I'm really good at all these other things, which you want to reinforce. And I know paying attention is not really the thing I'm good at. Okay, so let's work on that. Let's teach that skill. That's a skill that doesn't come as naturally to you as it does to other kids, but that doesn't mean, doesn't mean we can't work on it. It doesn't mean things can't get better. Okay, so the collaborative problem solving approach. So what does this mean? So in order to problem solve, once we've connected, once we feel calm, we want to identify circumstances under which a behavior occurs and then take steps to prevent it from next time. And so we're using basically a problem solving approach. And so we're thinking of proactively and collaboratively, parent and child, caregiver and child, how do we attack this problem together? Right? So it's not me versus you, it's us against this problem, this lagging skill that I have that turns into an unsolved problem. So my lagging skill is paying attention, and then my unsolved problem is I never get my work done on time, or I always lose things, right? And so, okay, always losing things is a problem. How do we tackle that together, knowing that paying attention is really hard for me? And he talks about kind of most problems behaviors are reoccurring. So we often, caregivers, parent reactively to situations, but if you kind of took a step back and talked about it outside of those moments, like I'm sure tonight you're all saying, oh yes, like I have problems with A, B, C, and D, right? So they really are recurring, and we really could be more proactive if we really thought about, okay, what's my overall framework for approaching this? But that isn't what usually happens. Usually it's just kind of we're troubleshooting and putting out fires, like kind of in the moment as they're happening. So we really want to be more intentional is really the idea. And I say this, take it with a grain of salt. We can't always be intentional all the time about everything, right? There's hundreds of things that go on all the time, every day in a family. And so it's not that you're always going to be able to be really mindful and really intentional when you're approaching your child about some problem. But if you're targeting, if you're saying, we have this lagging skill that's like getting more and more in the way and has become this ongoing problem, like sleep is an ongoing problem because there's this lagging skill of transition. So my child always has a hard time with transitions, and we've been having this problem for months now of having a hard time getting ready for bed. So I am targeting that. There's lots of other things that I'm not going to be able to target right now. My kids are still not eating their vegetables and they're still getting in fights at school. But right now I'm focused on, I want bedtime to go better. So I'm really focused on, this is the lagging skill and this is the problem I'm trying to solve with my child. Again, collaborative. So what does that look like? And so here are some examples based on those lagging skills. What might be some recurring problems that you might be struggling with? Okay. So what does it look like? So collaborative problem solving, which Greene calls the Plan B approach. He talks about 3 steps. So the first step is we want to describe the issue and gather information about a child's perspective or concern. So this is the connection piece. So I've noticed that, we're having a lot of fights at bedtime lately. What's up? Or I noticed that you're really not wanting to get into bed lately. What's up? Right? And so we're really just trying to understand. This seems like it's been hard for you lately. I wonder what that's about for you. And just kind of being curious and having a really non-judgmental stance. Just connecting, really. It's back to kind of, if you take one thing away from today, thinking about being able to connect with your child in those moments. Okay, so I've noticed this. What's up? Yeah, this is a problem, or, well, I don't know, I just don't really like this. And they'll come up with something and you'll have a bit of a discussion. And your goal isn't to defend your position or justify why this is happening, but just validate, oh, it seems like this has really been hard for you. Oh, wow, you've been struggling with this for a really long time. You get really, really angry with mommy when mommy says time for bed when you're in the middle of video games. That must be so hard for you. You love video games so much, right? So you're really just putting yourself in their shoes and really trying to show them, I hear what you're saying. You're not agreeing. Understanding and validating is not agreeing. You're just showing them, I get what you're saying. Next step, once you feel like you have that connection and you're kind of in the same boat together, you're placing your concern on the table. So the thing is, and here's my adult concern, right? So let's say it's the bedtime issue. The thing is, I'm worried about you staying up too late. Or the thing is, when you stay up late, it's really hard to get up in the morning. Or the thing is, when you stay up late, mommy can't get her stuff done around the house that she wants to get done, right? And so you're just presenting your concern and your side of it, right? Okay. So then step 3 is you want to brainstorm solutions collaboratively to arrive at a plan that's both realistic and mutually satisfactory. So here's the invitation step. So I wonder if there's a way to get ready for bedtime in a better way, while also, or getting to have video game time at night, while also making sure that we don't stay up too late and then have a hard time waking up in the morning. How can we do that? Do you have any ideas? And so let's just brainstorm and let's be as silly as possible. And let's come up with all the options. Well, let's just stay up forever. And who cares about ever going to school? Whatever, like just kind of, let's just start brainstorming and talking about it. And let's see if there's something that we can agree to where we kind of meet in the middle. And I'm just noticing the time. Hopefully I'm going to go, if everyone's okay with it, maybe about 10 minutes over, just given how late we started. But I will move, we're kind of mostly through the content. So this last step is really meant to be as collaborative as possible. So it's not kind of, I'm telling you, this is how it's going to be. It's we're working together. So let's say the example is, you spend way too much time on video games. From now on, you only get 15 minutes a day. That would not be a collaborative problem solving approach. That would just be like, I'm setting the limit. This is what's happening. Or, describing the issue. I've noticed that you're spending a lot of time on video games these days. What's up? And then they'll tell you like, oh, it's a new game and all my friends are playing it and I love it so much. So the thing is, it's not really working out very well, right? It puts off homework. And I also want to make sure you're spending time on other activities and not just screens. I wonder if there's a way to give you some time on video games while also making sure you're getting homework done. Any ideas? What should we do? Right? And then they might say, well, maybe you can give me a certain amount of time. What do you think is realistic? You think like 3 hours is realistic, 10 hours is realistic. Well, I don't know, Mom, maybe 1 hour, right? So then then you're going to say, well, I was kind of thinking 15 minutes, but you think an hour. What if we decide on 30 minutes to start and let's see how it goes, right? So, and they still might be somewhat resistant, but at least they're more likely to buy in and there's some investment because they're part of the solution. They've come up with it with you. And so it's really about thinking about kind of a shift in the traditional approach, which is really top down and one directional. I'm telling you this and you just have to listen, to a more collaborative approach. It's going to be more reciprocal. It's back and forth. And by doing this, kids feel like their opinions are valued and they're more likely to buy in because they're a part of it. They're more apt to cooperate, help come up with some solutions, and then actually cooperate with the solutions. And another benefit is it's actually exercising this upstairs brain that is they're just kind of in the middle of developing, right? So that problem solving approach, that thinking of different options. Okay. So I thought this is about 5 minutes. I thought I would show you this video because it really just highlights this collaborative problem solving approach. And then I can take time for questions. I'm just looking. Anyone? Okay, so I'm going to play this. And if you're not interested in the video, I mean, it's really helpful to kind of solidify this, but and you want to start typing questions in the chat, feel free to do so.
Hi, I'm Taylor. I'm pretty much a regular kid. I like playing video games. I like playing soccer. I like my dog, Frisbee. I like hanging out with my friends. I think my mom and dad are pretty cool, except they're always getting on my case about something. And I get frustrated sometimes. Now, everybody gets frustrated sometimes, so that's not so unusual. And I get really upset when I get frustrated. And that's turning into a pretty big problem. Like when my mom is trying to help me with my homework. Or like when my team loses a soccer game. Or when I'm not doing well in my video game. Or when my little brother goes in my bedroom and messes with my stuff. Or like when it's time to get up for school in the morning. It's not like I'm trying to get really upset. It just happens. Some kids cry when they're frustrated, like my sister. Some kids pout or hide when they get frustrated, like my little brother. People don't seem to mind that stuff so much, but when I get frustrated, I scream and sometimes swear, and sometimes I hit and throw things. And then my mom and dad sometimes get really upset too. And then they give me timeouts or take away privileges. I've had a lot of timeouts in my life, but all those timeouts never helped me stay calm when I got frustrated. My mom and dad have taken me to a bunch of doctors to figure out what's going on with me. Some of the doctors thought that if my parents used a sticker chart, I wouldn't get so frustrated. But then I got frustrated when I didn't get stickers. Some of the doctors thought medicine would help me be less frustrated. One of the medicines just made me tired. The other one made me gain a lot of weight. And some of the doctors said I had some kind of disorder, oppositional something, but no one really helped me or my parents understand why I got so frustrated so easily. Finally, my parents took me to a doctor. Her name is Dr. Hart. She's really nice. She said there are just some skills that I'm not so good at. She said some kids aren't so good at math or reading or writing or throwing a ball. I'm not so good at some other skills, like flexibility and frustration tolerance and problem solving. She said that I don't get frustrated all the time, only when there's an expectation I'm having difficulty meeting. Then she made a list of all the problems that were making me frustrated. She called them unsolved problems. There were a lot of problems on that list, like some of the ones I already said. Difficulty completing the math word problems for homework, difficulty losing a soccer game, difficulty losing a game on Madden NFL, difficulty if my little brother goes in my room and messes with my stuff, difficulty waking up for school in the morning, and there were a bunch more, like difficulty deciding what program to watch when I'm watching TV with my brother and sister, and difficulty taking out the trash on Tuesday mornings, and difficulty eating what my mom makes for dinner. The doctor said that if we solved those problems, then I wouldn't get so frustrated over them anymore. She told us not to wait until the problems popped up again to try to solve them. She said that would be bad timing. She helped us figure out a good time every day to solve them. For me, that's when my mom or dad was putting me to bed at night. Turns out my brother and sister had some unsolved problems too. That made me feel better that I wasn't the only one. Then she taught us 3 steps for solving the problems. In the first step, my parents asked me a lot of questions about what was making it hard for me to meet the expectation. In the second step, they told me why they thought it was important for me to meet the expectation. And in the third step, we figured out solutions together, solutions that worked for both of us. So, like on the math homework, we kind of figured out that I don't really have a clue what's going on in math. Instead of us fighting over stuff I didn't understand, they just let the teacher know the problems I couldn't do for homework. And then my teacher gave me some extra help. Problem solved. Though I still don't like math that much. And the one about waking up in the morning, it turns out my parents thought they were doing me a favor by waking me up like an hour before the school bus came, so I'd have some time to get ready for school in the morning. But I didn't really need an hour to get ready for school. So now my parents wake me up 10 minutes before the bus is going to come. Then I get dressed really fast. Sometimes I even sleep in the clothes I'm going to wear the next day, just to save time. Then I eat something fast, like a Pop-Tart or something, and then dart out the door. No more fights on that one, and I'm getting a lot more sleep. And the one about deciding what to watch on TV with my brother and sister, we solved that one all together. We figured out the shows each of us really wanted to watch, then came up with a schedule. That one's going pretty well, except my brother sometimes loses track of what time it is. Oh, and the one about my mom's food, we had a long discussion about things she makes that I like and the things that she makes that I don't like. She said that she couldn't always make stuff that I liked, and that she didn't want to be a short-order chef. So we agreed that if she makes something I don't want to eat, I'll just eat like mac and cheese or have a cereal. So things are going a lot better now. No one even thinks I have an opposition or whatever it is anymore. I'm not really sure I ever did. We just needed some help solving some problems. I still get frustrated sometimes, but now I know that if something is making me frustrated, my mom and dad and I can solve whatever problem it is together, instead of us getting all huffed up about them. And all those timeout and sticker charts, we don't do that stuff anymore.
Okay.
That was great. Thanks again, Susan.
No problem. I did
That
have
was-
a couple of resources I thought I would share.
Please, yes, go ahead.
If I can just remember how to get back to my presentation. Sorry. Nope. Okay. I'm gonna have to look for it while we talk, but I'm happy to answer questions. Good, I'm glad to make the video. Sometimes I don't know because I'm explaining it all, but I sometimes, the video is just really helpful to solidify it. And
of course, yes. Yeah, someone actually said in the comments, love that video. Thank you. We have one question, and We'll spend just a couple of minutes for questions. And so one person's asked, this is an interesting one. Curious for those older adults who were never tested for ADHD, but let's assume they do have it. Are there techniques that can be used to help them grasp concepts easier?
Techniques for you grasp, like if it's hard for you to focus and pay attention.
Yeah, I'm assuming for an older adult who might not have had the opportunity to get tested.
So I was going to share a couple of great resources. So there's the CHADD, CADD.org, which has a lot of great resources. So I would say like the main thing that you want to think about is it's actually, regardless of if it's ADHD or not, it's executive functioning skills that it's really struggling with. So those higher order thinking, planning skills, organization, attention, all those things. And so getting some resources on executive functioning can help with some of the things I think you're looking for. So things like breaking tasks down into smaller chunks, taking 15-minute movement, like only working for 15 minutes at a time and taking a movement break, having a white noise machine or, earphones when you're working. So there's lots of different little strategies, but I would say if you get some resources on executive functioning, then that could be something that's helpful.
That's great. Very illuminating. Next question. How does someone get tested for ADHD?
So psychologists do assessments for ADHD and would give a diagnosis. There's some structured kind of standardized measures that we use, comparing 100 other kids the same age on different symptoms. And so, again, everyone might have some symptoms, but if you have at least 6 symptoms in 1 or 2 different areas, the impulsivity, hyperactivity, then, so they're going to look at get questionnaires from school, get questionnaires from home. They're going to meet the child and do some one-on-one testing, some tests that look at attention, look at memory, look at learning, and then that's how you would make a diagnosis. Physicians also make diagnoses for ADHD, some more so than others. I would say like developmental pediatricians would definitely assess for ADHD. And some physicians, I find, there's a great need and obviously a great place for physicians. And when it's very straightforward, a physician can make that diagnosis, but sometimes it's more complex. And so it can be a little trickier. So their assessments are much shorter. So they'll do a couple questionnaires and then could make a diagnosis.
Perfect. A few more questions here. Does ADHD run in the family? This person's just curious.
Yeah, so there's definitely a genetic component. And often, I don't remember what the stat is. I don't remember what the stat is, but there's a higher percentage of a child having ADHD if there's a immediate family member with ADHD.
Great. You might just repeat what you said earlier for this one, but nonetheless, might as well mention it. What are good resources for tips for executive functioning? Good resources.
So, and this is why I'm frustrated right now because my presentation, I updated it with some new resources and I don't have it on me right now. But so it's CHADD, it's CADDAC, CADDAC, which is the Canadian ADHD Awareness, Education, and Advocacy Group. And they have a lot of great resources. And then there is one more, the Child Mind Institute. So the Child Mind Institute is a great resource for a lot of different things. And they have some really great articles on executive functioning. So if you just go to childmind.org and if you search executive function, they would have some good resources.
Okay. One person, if you can, Susan, if you could write that in the chat, and then what I'll do is I'll take the resources that you've talked about and I'll send everyone an email. Oh, I can see one person has put some in. Yeah, so that's what I'll do. So actually, if it's easier for you, Susan, you can send me those things that you've talked about. You can send them tomorrow. when
Okay.
you got a chance, and then I'll send them out to all the perfect. Okay. A couple more here. What are good resources for or sorry, wrong one. What are tools and techniques for flexible thinking for kids?
Flexible thinking. So I would say like this approach, the CPS approach, really fosters that flexible thinking, right? And so helping kids better understand, oh, this is something that I have, I'm identifying that actually might be getting in my way, and are there other ways to think about it? And so let's brainstorm, let's talk about all the different ways we can think about this, and the good parts and the not good parts. There's something like at Boomerang Health, we have the social skill groups, and they talk about something called Rock Brain is one of their, they're called, I forget what the name of the program is, but in that group and a lot of social skill groups, they talk about some of these strategies. So Rock Brain is, I get really stuck in my way of thinking, and so I need to be more flexible in how I think about things. And so, considering lots of different alternatives before we come up with a solution.
Great. Okay, 2 more questions and we're done for tonight. This one's slightly long for the context, so do what you can with it. One parent asked, what approach would you recommend for a 4.5-year-old who is always hurting his infant brother? We try to separate them most of the time, but that's not always possible. We understand it could be a mix of jealousy and frustration. We suspect he has hyperactive impulsive control. He is undiagnosed even though his older brother is combined. We tried stickers, taking away toys, praising good behavior. Plan B seems a bit too long of a process for him. He can't sit through it. So what do you think?
So I would say, I think you can modify, but I think you do want to kind of think about, okay, not in that moment, but at a different time, in a quiet time, Sunday night, bedtime, or sometime on the weekend. I'm noticing you're hurting Johnny a lot. And just kind of even like less words. So even just saying that, no, I don't hurt him. Oh, remember before you hit him and yesterday you hit him? Yeah, there's a lot of hitting, right? I think even at 4.5, they would be able to understand that. Okay, so the problem is that probably really hurts him. You would really be hurt if that happened to you. And how do we keep hands to self? Or what do we do? And we get so frustrated. We really just want to hit him, and let's practice and let's see what that's like. What should we do? Should we use a pillow? Should we go run and tell mommy? Should we jump up and down 5 times? Like, let's try to think about every time I want to take my hands and do something like that, this is what I do instead. And let's practice, and let's, okay, Johnny, come here. You say that thing that you always say that makes, Michael want to hit you. Okay, now I'm about to hit him. Nope, I'm going to try that other thing instead, right? But before, you got to do it kind of in a silly, playful, fun way. So you're not going to do it in the moment where the kid's frustrated, right? You're going to be talking about it at a different time. But I think even no matter how young kids are, you can modify your language, and you can the less words, the better, but you can still kind of use those concepts.
That's great. Okay, our last question. And before we get to it, I see a few people have put in the things that you've talked about, the resources. So thank you to those. I'll get all 3 of them, and I'll send everyone out that list. So this is the last question. How do you deal with lying?
So I would say lying would be an unsolved problem. Like, the problem is they're lying a lot. And I would really want to think about what that lagging skill is that's underneath, what's leading to the lying. They're not, again, like, kids aren't intentionally, maliciously bad. There's something that they're avoiding, and lying is their solution, right? And it's not a good solution. And so we want to modify that. But I would really try to think about, and that's where you can use this approach, like, I noticed that you've been, telling us that you're doing this when it doesn't seem like that's true. Like, I've noticed that, you've seemed to be telling a lot of lies lately. Or I would try to be more specific, like what the actual lie is about, and what's up. you don't like telling us stuff because you think you're going to get in trouble, or you're sick of always having to, do this or that. I would really try to understand what's underlying it.
Mhm. Okay, this is actually a good way of closing. One person's just curious if you do counseling for kids, or how does Boomerang, how do they go about contacting Boomerang Health if they want more info?
Yeah, and sorry, I'm just going to show, this is the lives and the balance. That would be like the last resource that you would want.
Great. I'll include this in the email.
Yeah, so apologies. That's probably something I would have done at the beginning usually. So for those who don't know, Boomerang Health, we're like an outpatient healthcare clinic. We're owned by SickKids, but we operate separately in the Vaughan region. And so we have our primary care facilities. So we have physicians, and then we have specialists, neurologists, gastroenterologists, a lot of different specialists. And then we have our rehab services. So in rehab, we have our brain and mental health team, which is psychology, social work, and psychotherapists. We have speech therapy, occupational therapy, massage for pediatric massage, which actually can be really helpful for kids with ADHD, physiotherapy. And so really, so to access any of our primary care services, you need a family doctor referral, but any of our rehab service, and that's OHIP covered, any of our rehab services are either you pay out of pocket, or it's through, you have it coverage through your insurance company. And so you really can just call the clinic. You don't need a referral. You can self-refer and just say you're interested in, my child is struggling with this, what's the right service? It could be brain and mental health, but sometimes our occupational therapists can be great at targeting certain things with emotion regulation. And our speech and language therapists do a lot of work with social communication. And so I just mentioned that because their wait lists are much shorter than ours. So sometimes you can get some support. We also have groups. So we have an anxiety group. We have a caregiver workshop, which touches on this, but goes into detail. And we have a few different groups. We have a social skill group as well. So if you just reach out to our admin, you can get more information. And we also, you can look at our website as well.
That's perfect.
About the groups.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Susan. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
Thanks again for your patience.
Absolutely. Not to worry. We understand all the difficulties that come with Zoom and otherwise. So once again, thank you everyone. Have a good night, and feel free to reach out to Boomerang Health if you have more questions. You can reach out to me. I'll send that email tomorrow in the afternoon when I'm back in. And until then, I hope everyone has a good night. Once again, thank you, Susan.
Thank you.